The air in the dining room literally crackled with tension, thick enough to cut with a knife, but I just smiled. A small, almost imperceptible smile, but it was there. My sister, Sarah, had just finished her little Thanksgiving speech, a performance really about how I needed to stop begging for money. The words hung in the silence, punctuated only by the clinking of cutlery from my aunt, who was meticulously avoiding eye contact with anyone. Everyone else at the table, a dozen faces ranging from shock to a carefully neutral blankness, just stayed quiet. They exchanged furtive glances, waiting for my reaction, waiting for the explosion they were all so accustomed to from our family gatherings. But this time there wouldn't be an explosion. There would be a gentle surgical strike. My smile widened just a fraction. Was I wrong for what I did next? Tell me honestly if you would have done the same thing. To truly understand what happened at that Thanksgiving table, you need to go back, way back, to when Sarah and I were just kids. We're 5 years apart. She's older, and from the moment she could talk, she was the golden child. The brightest, the prettiest, the most talented. At least, that's what our parents, especially our mother, constantly reinforced. I, on the other hand, was always the quiet one, the smart one, the one who needed to try harder to be like Sarah. It wasn't malicious, not overtly, but it was a constant, steady drip of comparison that slowly but surely eroded my self-esteem. Sarah could do no wrong. If she got a B on a test, it was because the teacher was unfair. If I got an A, it was expected, or worse, attributed to luck. She was given every opportunity, dance lessons, expensive art classes, private tutors for subjects she barely struggled with, all funded without question. For me, it was always a negotiation, a debate about whether it was worth the investment. Even as children, I started to notice the stark difference in how we were treated. But what could I do? I was just a kid. I learned to keep my head down, to find solace in books and in my own quiet achievements. Achievements that rarely garnered the same fanfare as Sarah's most mediocre accomplishments. This favoritism wasn't just about money. It was about attention, validation, and emotional support. Sarah could throw a tantrum, and our mother would rush to console her. I could express genuine sadness, and I'd be told to be stronger or not to make such a fuss. It built a resentment in me, a slow, burning ember that I constantly tried to smother, telling myself that's just how families are. Fast forward to our college years. Sarah went to a prestigious out-of-state university, and our parents footed the entire bill: tuition, housing, living expenses, a brand. New car, unlimited spending money. It was, in their words, an investment in her future. She studied fine arts, a passion she claimed, though it seemed more like a way to avoid any real responsibility. She changed majors 3 times, dropped out for a semester to find herself in Europe again, fully funded by our parents, and eventually graduated with a degree that, honestly, didn't seem to lead anywhere. I, on the other hand, chose to stay in state, attending a highly rated but more affordable public university. My parents, particularly my father, told me they would contribute, but I needed to take out loans and work part-time. It builds character, he'd say, conveniently forgetting the character, building opportunities he'd so generously provided Sarah. I worked 2 jobs throughout my undergraduate degree, often pulling all-nighters, studying during my lunch breaks, and sacrificing any semblance of a social life. I was determined to prove myself, not just to them, but to myself. I studied computer science, a field I genuinely loved and excelled in, a field that offered a clear path to financial independence. My parents barely acknowledged my hard work. When I'd mention a tough exam or a challenging project, the conversation would inevitably loop back to something Sarah was doing, some minor inconvenience she was facing, which would then be treated as a major crisis by our mother. The disparity in treatment was a constant, stinging reminder of my place in their eyes. After college, things somehow got worse. Sarah, with her fine arts degree and a rather entitled attitude, struggled to find a job. Or rather, she struggled to find a job that met her perceived standards. She bounced from unpaid internships to part-time gigs, always complaining about how unfair the world was. Our parents, naturally, continued to support her financially. They bought her an apartment in the city, paid her utilities, gave her a generous monthly allowance, and even funded her passion projects, elaborate, expensive hobbies that never seemed to materialize into anything. Meanwhile, I had secured a highly competitive position at a tech company straight out of university. I was building a career, working hard, and finally, after years of struggle, starting to achieve financial stability. But even then, I wasn't immune to Sarah's demands, or rather, our parents' demands on her behalf. Our mother started calling me, subtly at first, then more directly, asking if I could help Sarah out. "She's just going through a tough time," she'd say. "You're doing so well, a little bit wouldn't hurt." And because I still, deep down, craved their approval, craved that elusive feeling of being a good daughter, I started sending Sarah money. It began small, 100 here, 200 there, to help with rent or groceries. But it quickly escalated. She needed money for car repairs, for a new laptop for her freelance work. That never seemed to pan out, for a networking event. That was clearly just an expensive dinner. Our parents implicitly condoned this. They'd praise me for being so generous and looking out for my sister, completely ignoring the fact that they were the ones who had enabled Sarah's complete lack of financial responsibility. Over the years, these loans, which were never repaid, nor did anyone expect them to be, became an expected part of my financial outgoing. 5 regular payments every single month, transferred directly to Sarah's account, covering her rent, her car payment, her exorbitant phone bill, and her miscellaneous expenses. It was a significant chunk of my income, but I justified it to myself as a way to maintain some semblance of peace in the family. I kept telling myself that one day she'd get her act together, and I wouldn't have to do this anymore. One day, our parents would see my efforts, my sacrifices, and finally acknowledge me. This went on for years. Years of me working my tail off, advancing in my career, meticulously saving and investing, all while silently subsidizing Sarah's lavish lifestyle and our parents' blind favoritism. I kept my financial successes completely under wraps. My parents knew I had a good job, but they had no idea how good. They assumed I was comfortable, but certainly not as financially stable as I truly was. I never flaunted anything, never bought expensive cars or designer clothes, instead choosing to live modestly and focus on building true security. I was saving for a down payment on my own apartment, planning for my future, while Sarah was still relying on me and our parents for her day-to-day existence, complaining about how little money she had. The irony was suffocating. I harbored no illusions about Sarah ever repaying me, and frankly, at that point, I didn't even want the money back. It had become a sunk cost, a twisted form of emotional currency I paid to avoid constant conflict and guilt trips from my mother. But the resentment, that quiet ember, continued to burn hotter and hotter with each new demand, each new complaint from Sarah about her struggles, while I watched her post pictures of expensive dinners and weekend getaways, paid for with my money. My breaking point was slowly approaching. It wasn't a sudden event, but a gradual build-up, a slow accumulation of slights and disrespect that chipped away at my patience. Every time I heard my parents brag about Sarah's latest achievement, usually an artistic endeavor that required significant financial input from them, while my own very real, very substantial career successes were barely acknowledged, the anger would simmer. Every time Sarah called, not to ask how I was, but to subtly hint that she was a little short this month, I felt a knot of frustration tighten in my stomach. I often wondered if they even saw me as a person, or just an ATM with a pulse. So that's the situation I was in. Years of being the family ATM, years of being overlooked, years of being silently compared and found wanting, all while I secretly built a life that far surpassed any of their wildest expectations. And then Sarah's little speech at the Thanksgiving table, her brazen accusation delivered with such an air of self-righteousness about me begging for money. The sheer audacity of it, coming from the very person I was financially supporting, in front of the very people who had enabled her for so long, was a gut punch. It was the straw that broke the camel's back. I had been planning something, brewing it for months. I knew Thanksgiving was the perfect opportunity. Before I tell you what happened next, I want you to pause and comment below what you would have done in my shoes. Would you have kept quiet, swallowed the insult, and continued to enable the cycle? Or would you have finally stood up for yourself, even if it meant shattering the fragile peace of the holiday? Tell me honestly, what would your move have been? I looked around the table again, my father with a stern, disapproving look on his face, clearly expecting me to cower. My mother with that familiar, saccharine smile plastered on her face, silently urging me to apologize, to smooth things over, to always put Sarah first. And Sarah herself, sitting there, smug and triumphant, basking in the perceived victory of her public humiliation of me. That's when my smile, that small, almost imperceptible smile, truly broadened. It wasn't a happy smile, but a calm, resolute one. A smile that said, I am done. I took a slow, deliberate sip of water, letting the silence stretch, letting the anticipation build. Then I set my glass down, looking directly at Sarah. You know, Sarah, I began, my voice clear and steady, cutting through the silence like a knife. It's funny you say that about me begging for money. Her smug expression faltered slightly. She probably expected tears or an angry outburst. My calm tone clearly threw her off, because actually, I continued leaning forward slightly. For the past few years, it's been quite the opposite, hasn't it? The entire table shifted. My mother's smile vanished, my father's brow furrowed deeper, Sarah's eyes narrowed. What are you talking about? She scoffed, trying to regain her composure. Everyone here knows you're struggling, that you always need help. I chuckled, a low, humorless sound. Do they now, or do they just think they know? Because that's the narrative you and Mom have carefully constructed. I paused, letting my words sink in. Since you brought up finances, Sarah, and since you seem so concerned about me begging, let's talk about the 5 payments I make to you every single month. Gasps erupted around the table. My mother choked on her wine. My father's face turned a shade of puce I hadn't seen before. Sarah's jaw dropped, her face going from indignant to a ghastly pale. What payments? My father demanded, his voice booming. What is she talking about? My mother quickly interjected. It's nothing, dear, just small sisterly favors, you know, helping each other out. Small sisterly favors. I interrupted, cutting her off cleanly. Mom, you know perfectly well I've been covering Sarah's rent, her car payment, her phone bill, and her miscellaneous expenses every month for the last 3 years, to the tune of nearly $3,000 a month. So no, Mom, it's not small favors. It's called subsidizing an adult who refuses to take responsibility. I pulled out my phone, unlocked it, and with a flourish, opened my banking app. And speaking of those payments, I said, my voice dangerously calm, it seems like a perfect time to make a little change. I navigated to my recurring payments section, selected all 5 transfers. Sarah, and one by one, with a deliberate tap of my finger, I canceled them. Each tap was like a tiny explosion of relief in my chest. There, I announced, looking up from my phone, meeting Sarah's horrified gaze, all 5 payments canceled. Effective immediately, the silence that followed was deafening. My mother looked like she was about to faint. My father was sputtering, trying to form coherent words, his face a roadmap of shock and outrage. Sarah, however, was speechless. Her face was a mask of disbelief, then dawning panic. She started to reach for her own phone, her hand trembling. My father finally found his voice. What in God's name have you done? He roared. How dare you embarrass your sister like this? How dare you hold money over her head? Hold money over her head, I repeated, a bitter laugh escaping my lips. Dad, for years you've enabled her, praised her for doing nothing, and criticized me for everything. You never once asked about my career, my struggles, my successes. All you ever saw was Sarah. All you ever cared about was Sarah. And now, when I finally stopped pouring my hard-earned money into her black hole of irresponsibility, you accuse me of being in the wrong. My mother, finding some semblance of composure, tried to play the peacemaker. Darling, we just want everyone to get along. Sarah is going through a difficult time. You know how hard it is for artists. Oh, I know how hard it is, I countered, my voice rising slightly, especially when you're used to having everything handed to you on a silver platter. Unlike me, who actually worked 3 jobs and took out loans to put myself through college, while Sarah was gallivanting around Europe on your dime. This brought another wave of gasps. The other family members at the table were now openly staring, their jaws practically on the floor. You know what, Mom, Dad? I continued, standing up slowly, my chair scraping loudly against the wooden floor. You're right. I'm done begging. I'm done begging for your attention, your approval, and certainly your money. Because guess what? I don't need it. I've built a life and a successful career with no help from either of you. I can pay my own way, and I don't need to be your little ATM anymore. Enjoy your Thanksgiving, I said, picking up my small purse, and Sarah, I hope you enjoy figuring out how to pay for your rent next month. Maybe that freelance work will finally pay off. As I turned to walk away, a frantic buzzing sound started, Sarah's phone, then another buzz and another and another. Her phone wouldn't stop buzzing. It was the banks, the car finance company, the utility providers, all sending automated notifications about failed payments, about accounts suddenly in arrears. The notifications, each one a tiny chime of my quiet revenge, filled the suddenly silent dining room. The look on Sarah's face, a mixture of pure terror and absolute fury, was priceless. It was the only validation I ever truly needed. I walked out of that house and got into my car, the buzzing of Sarah's phone still echoing in my ears. I drove away, not looking back, a profound sense of liberation washing over me. Aftermath was, as expected, chaotic. My phone immediately started ringing, first my mother, then my father, then Sarah herself. I ignored them all. I needed space, needed to process everything. Voicemails were a mixture of outrage, pleas, and a desperate attempt to manipulate me back into the old dynamic. My mother tearfully explained how I had ruined Thanksgiving and broken Sarah's heart. My father threatened to disown me if I didn't reinstate the payments. Sarah, in a fit of rage, screamed about how I was a selfish bitch and how I was trying to destroy her life. I just deleted them. I blocked their numbers for a few days, letting the storm rage without me. When I finally unblocked them, the tone had shifted slightly. My mother was now trying to guilt-trip me, playing the poor Sarah a card. My father was still angry, but sounded a little more desperate, realizing that his usual threats no longer held any power. And Sarah, she called once, much calmer, trying to apologize and promising to find a job if I would just help her out one last time. I told her, politely but firmly, that the bank was closed permanently. I explained that I had been supporting her for years, sacrificing my own financial goals, and that I was done. I owed her nothing, and it was time for her to stand on her own 2 feet, just like I had. She hung up on me. It's been a few months since that Thanksgiving. Things are definitely different. My relationship with my parents is strained, to say the least. They still haven't fully processed the fact that I'm not the struggling dependent child they always assumed I was. There's a grudging respect there now, though, especially from my father, who I think secretly admires my decisive action, even if he hates the reason behind it. He's even started asking me about my life, my work, my plans, which is a monumental shift. My mother is still trying to mend things, but she knows I won't be pushed around anymore. Sarah, on the other hand, is a different story. She's been forced to get a retail job to cover her expenses, and I hear through the grapevine that she's having a very difficult time adjusting to life. Without a safety net, she still hasn't repaid any of the money she borrowed, but I no longer care. The freedom of not being her personal ATM is worth every penny I lost. We haven't spoken directly since that call. I don't know if we ever will truly reconcile, and honestly, I'm okay with that. Sometimes cutting toxic ties is the only way to truly heal and move forward. My life is lighter, freer, and much more peaceful without that constant financial and emotional drain. I finally feel seen, not just for what I can provide, but for who I am and what I've achieved. So, that's my story. It was a tough road, but standing up for myself, especially in such a public and definitive way, was one of the best decisions I've ever made. The silence at that Thanksgiving table, followed by the incessant buzzing of Sarah's phone, was a symphony of sweet, sweet justice. Was I wrong? Maybe in the eyes of some, but in my heart, I know I did what I had to do. Like this video if you were on my side, subscribe for more stories like this, and share your final thoughts on this whole mess in the comments section below. I'll see you all in the next story.